In 1984, a set of triplets vanished from their school. 29 years later, a chilling discovery was made. 3 sisters vanished without a trace from their school, leaving a town shrouded in mystery and a family devastated by grief. The case remained unsolved for 29 long years, but everything changed when a construction crew stumbled upon a secret room in the school's old basement, uncovering a terrifying truth that had been buried for decades. What secrets were hidden behind that wall? Watch until the end to uncover the chilling conclusion to one of America's most gripping unsolved cases and find out what really happened to the Henderson triplets. And while you're here, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Tell us in the comments below, where are you watching this video from? Detective Jessica Hayes got the call at 7:23 a.m. on October 15, 2013. A construction team, while overhauling the cellar of Elmwood High School, had uncovered something that would reopen one of the most haunting cold cases in the county's history. "Detective, you need to get down here." Officer Marcus's voice crackled over the radio as Jessica pulled up to the old brick building that had been serving the community for over half a century. The autumn air was sharp as she entered through the main doors, passing display cases filled with decades of student achievements. The construction foreman, a man named Jim Stevens with a face weathered by the elements, guided her down a narrow staircase to the basement. "We were pulling out the old furnace when we found this void behind the wall," Stevens explained, pointing to a section of concrete that had been recently breached. It had been sealed up tight. No one knew it was here. Jessica slipped on a pair of latex gloves and ducked through the opening. The beam of her flashlight revealed a small room, perhaps 8 by 10 feet, with an air that was stale and ancient. Against the far wall were 3 wooden chairs. Scattered on the floor were personal belongings that made her heart sink. A class ring from Elmwood High, class of 1984, a small brass-locked pink journal, and a varsity jacket with eagles embroidered on the back. Most unsettling of all were 3 student ID cards bearing the names Olivia, Sophia, and Isabella Henderson. The air inside the hidden room carried a strange weight. It wasn't only the stale dampness of concrete left untouched for decades. Jessica caught a faint metallic tang, like rust or dried blood, that seemed out of place in an old-school basement. The smell alone made her pulse quicken. It whispered of suffering long past, but never gone. The Triplet sisters had disappeared without a trace on May 23, 1984, just a few weeks before they were to graduate. "No one goes in or out until the crime scene team arrives," Jessica instructed Marcus. "And find me the contact information for David Henderson. He's going to need to know about this." David Henderson was 12 when his 3 older sisters vanished. Now 41 and an accountant in the same town where he grew up, he had never given up hope that they were still alive somewhere. The original investigation had concluded the girls had run away together, perhaps to escape family pressure or to start a new life in California, a place they often spoke of moving to after graduation. Jessica found David at his office in the Henderson & Associates accounting firm downtown. The years had been kind to him physically, but she could see the weight of unresolved sorrow in his eyes as she introduced herself. "Mr. Henderson, I need to talk to you about your sisters. We've made a discovery at the high school." David's coffee mug froze halfway to his mouth. "What kind of discovery?" "We found a hidden room in the basement. There were personal items belonging to Olivia, Sophia, and Isabella. I'm afraid this fundamentally changes the nature of their case." The color drained from David's face. "You're saying they never left town?" "That's what the evidence suggests." I need to ask you some questions about May 23rd, 1984, about what happened that day." David leaned back in his chair, his hands shaking slightly. "I've gone over that day 1,000 times in my head. The girls left for school that morning like they always did. Olivia was driving Dad's blue Buick. They had English first period. Then Sophia had chemistry, Isabella had art class, and Olivia had study hall. They were supposed to be home for dinner by 4 now, but they never came home. When they weren't back by 6 Mom called the school. The principal said they'd attended their morning classes, but nobody remembered seeing them after lunch. Their car was still in the student parking lot, with the keys inside." Jessica made notes as David spoke. Jessica underlined the detail. In 1984, stolen cars were hardly unusual, yet no one had touched the Buick in nearly 3 decades. It was as if the vehicle itself had been marked by some invisible boundary, a silent warning that it belonged to forces no one dared cross. The original case file would have all this information, but she wanted to hear it firsthand in case something new emerged after 29 years. "Tell me about their relationships, boyfriends, close friends, anyone who might have wanted to hurt them." "That's just it. Everyone adored the girls. They were popular, but not in a snobby way. Olivia was student council president, Sophia was on the debate team, and Isabella was in the drama club. They had boyfriends, but nothing serious. The police questioned everyone back then." "Who was the lead investigator?" "Detective Kevin Riley. He retired about 10 years ago, lives on Maple Street now." Jessica recognized the name. Riley had a reputation as a meticulous investigator, but the Henderson case had been one of his few unsolved mysteries. If Riley couldn't solve it with fresh evidence and witnesses, what had he missed? "David, I need you to think carefully. In the weeks before they disappeared, did you notice anything different about your sisters? Were they worried about anything? Acting strangely?" David was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the small downtown that had barely changed since the 1980s. "You know, there was something. About a week before they vanished, I heard them talking late at night. They were whispering, which was strange because they usually talked normally. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but Isabella sounded terrified, like someone had threatened her. But when I asked Olivia about it the next day, she just said they were discussing graduation plans." Jessica closed her notebook. "I'm going to need you to come down to the station later today to give a formal statement. And David, I want you to know we're going to treat this as an active homicide investigation. After 29 years, your family deserves answers." As Jessica left the accounting office, her mind was already processing the implications. 3 popular teenage girls don't just disappear from school grounds without someone noticing. The hidden room suggested premeditation and careful planning. Someone had prepared that space specifically to hold the Henderson triplets. Her next stop was the evidence locker to review the original case file. Detective Riley had been meticulous in his documentation, but 29 years ago, investigative techniques were more limited. There was no DNA analysis, no cell phone records to track, no social media accounts to examine. The investigation had relied primarily on witness interviews and physical evidence that had led nowhere. The original case file was thick with statements from classmates, teachers, and family members. The working theory had been that the girls had run away together after meeting boys from a nearby town. Several witnesses claimed to have seen them talking to strangers in the school parking lot during the weeks before their disappearance. But those leads had gone cold when police couldn't identify the mysterious strangers. Jessica read through Riley's notes carefully. He'd been particularly interested in the girls' last known activities. All 3 had attended their first period classes. On May 23rd, Olivia Henderson had been in English class discussing college application essays. Sophia had completed a chemistry lab on molecular structures, and Isabella had been working on a painting in art class, a landscape of the mountains visible from the school's east windows. But after lunch, their whereabouts became unclear. The school's attendance system in 1984 was paper-based, with teachers marking absent students on daily sheets. Several afternoon teachers had marked the Henderson girls as absent, but in the chaos of end-of-year activities, no one had thought it unusual enough to report immediately. The discovery of their personal belongings in that sealed room changed everything. Someone at Elmwood High School had been involved in their disappearance. Someone who had access to the building, knowledge of its layout, and the ability to construct a hidden room without detection. Jessica's phone buzzed with a text from the crime scene technician. "More items found. You need to see this." She drove back to the school where the crime scene team had expanded their search of the hidden room. Spread out on evidence sheets were additional items that painted a disturbing picture. Lengths of rope, clearly cut plastic zip ties, empty water bottles with the girls' fingerprints, and most disturbing of all, scratches on the walls that appeared to be desperate attempts to escape. Detective Hayes, the crime scene photographer, approached with his camera. "You need to look at this." He led her to the back wall of the hidden room, where his camera flash illuminated markings that hadn't been visible under a flashlight. Carved into the concrete were 3 sets of initials, O, SH, and IH, Olivia, Sophia, and Isabella Henderson. And beneath them, barely legible, were 2 words that made Jessica's blood run cold. Mr. Jensen. The name meant nothing to her, but it was a lead. The name hit Jessica like a blow. A shiver ran through her chest as if the letters carved into the wall were staring back at her from the past. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she recalled seeing Mr. Jensen mentioned in a yellowed Elmwood High newspaper she'd skimmed in the archives years ago. Back then, it was just another smiling faculty portrait. Now it was the signature of a predator. After 29 years of silence, the Henderson triplets were finally going to tell their story. Jessica spent the rest of that day pulling every record she could find related to Elmwood High School staff from 1984. The name Mr. Jensen appeared on the faculty roster as Arthur Jensen, a 34-year-old science teacher who had been hired in 1982, 2 years before the girls disappeared. According to personnel files, Jensen had taught general science and introductory chemistry to underclassmen. He'd been well regarded by the administration, described as enthusiastic and dedicated to student success in his performance evaluations. But more interesting to Jessica were the gaps in his employment record before Elmwood. Jensen had listed previous experience teaching in Ohio and Michigan, but when Jessica called those school districts, their personnel departments had no record of an Arthur Jensen matching his description during the years he claimed to have worked there. His references from those positions led to disconnected phone numbers and returned mail. Even more intriguing, Jensen had resigned from Elmwood High School abruptly in August 1984, citing a family emergency that required him to relocate to the West Coast. He'd left no forwarding address and hadn't requested a reference letter for future employment. Jessica's next call was to retired Detective Kevin Riley. The retired investigator sounded surprised to hear about the basement discovery, but agreed to meet her at the station that evening to review his old case notes. Kevin Riley arrived at 6 p.m. sharp, carrying a worn leather briefcase and walking with a slight limp that Jessica attributed to his 74 years. His handshake was firm, his eyes still sharp despite his age. "I thought about those Henderson girls at least once a week for the past 29 years, Riley began, settling into a chair across from Jessica's desk. "It never felt right to me that 3 smart, responsible kids would just vanish without a word to their family. Tell me about the original investigation. What leads did you pursue?" Riley opened his briefcase and pulled out a personal copy of his notes, pages of handwritten observations that weren't in the official file. We looked at everyone with access to the school building. Custodial staff, teachers, administrators, coaches. Most had solid alibis for the afternoon of May 23rd. What about Arthur Jensen? Riley's expression shifted, becoming more focused. Now that's interesting. You should ask about him. Jensen was one of the few people we couldn't definitively account for that afternoon. He claimed to be in his classroom grading papers, but no one could verify it. And he acted nervous during the interview, sweaty, couldn't maintain eye contact. Did you run a background check on him? As thorough as we could with 1984 technology. His references seemed legitimate at the time, though I remember thinking his employment history was unusually sparse for someone his age, but we had no evidence connecting him to the girls. Jessica showed Riley the crime scene photos from the hidden room, including the carved message with Jensen's name. The old detective studied them carefully, his jaw tightening as he absorbed the implications. This changes everything, he said finally. Those girls were held captive in that room, probably for days before. He didn't finish the sentence. Before, what happened to them? That's what we need to find out. But first, we need to locate Arthur Jensen. If he's still alive, he has questions to answer. Jessica had already begun that process. A nationwide search of records showed several Arthur Jensens of approximately the right age, but narrowing down which one was their suspect would take time. Meanwhile, she wanted to re-interview people who had known Jensen in 1984. The next morning, she visited Margaret Caldwell, who had been Elmwood High's principal during the period of the disappearance. Now retired and living in a neat ranch house on the outskirts of town, Caldwell welcomed Jessica with coffee and homemade cookies. I remember Mr. Jensen quite well, Caldwell said, settling into her living room chair. He was an excellent teacher, very popular with students. When he resigned so suddenly, I was disappointed to lose him. Did he give you any details about his family emergency? He said his mother was terminally ill in California and needed full-time care. I didn't question it. He seemed genuinely distraught. In retrospect, perhaps I should have been more thorough about checking his story. Jessica showed Caldwell a photograph of Jensen from the school yearbook. A thin man with brown hair, wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a polite smile. Did you ever notice anything inappropriate about his interactions with students? Caldwell was quiet for a moment. There was one incident, about 6 months before he left. A parent called to complain that Mr. Jensen had offered to give their daughter private tutoring sessions at his apartment. The mother thought it was inappropriate for a male teacher to be alone with a 16-year-old girl. How did you handle it? I spoke with Mr. Jensen about maintaining professional boundaries. He apologized and said he'd been trying to help a struggling student, but understood the parents' concerns. He agreed to only provide extra help during school hours in his classroom. Do you remember which student? I believe it was Jennifer Williams. She was a junior that year. Jessica made a note to locate Jennifer Williams and interview her about her interactions with Jensen. She also wanted to know if Jensen had offered similar tutoring to other students, possibly including the Henderson triplets. Her next stop was the current Elmwood High School principal, Dr. Robert Hayes, who had agreed to help her locate students and staff from the 1984 school year. Hayes had provided her with a list of contact information for classmates of the Henderson girls who still lived in the area. The first person she interviewed was Michael Carter, who had been Olivia Henderson's boyfriend during their senior year. Liv was amazing, Michael told Jessica over lunch at the town's main diner. Smart, funny, always thinking about other people. We were planning to go to prom together, then maybe try to stay together when we went to different colleges. Did she ever mention Mr. Jensen? Any problems with him or his class? Michael's expression darkened slightly. Actually, yes. About a month before she disappeared, Liv said something weird about Jensen. She was tutoring younger kids in science, and she mentioned that Jensen had been asking personal questions about her family and where she lived. What kind of questions? Like whether her parents worked late, if she had a job after school, when the family was usually home. Liv thought it was odd because the questions didn't relate to her tutoring duties. Did she report this to anyone? I don't think so. You have to understand, back then students didn't think as much about inappropriate behavior from teachers. We were taught to respect authority figures, not question them. Jessica spent the rest of the week conducting similar interviews with other students from the class of 1984. A pattern began to emerge. Arthur Jensen had shown unusual interest in several female students, asking personal questions about their schedules and family situations. He'd offered extra help in tutoring sessions, always suggesting private meetings outside regular school hours. Most disturbing of all, 3 different students recalled Jensen asking specifically about the Henderson triplets in the weeks before their disappearance. He'd inquired about their after-school activities, their part-time jobs, and whether they ever stayed late for drama club or debate team practice. By Friday afternoon, Jessica had enough information to confirm that Jensen should be considered the primary suspect in the Henderson disappearance, but finding him after 29 years would be the real challenge. Her breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Social Security records. Using Jensen's Social Security number from his Elmwood employment file, Jessica traced his movements after leaving the school. He'd worked briefly at a private school in Oregon from 1987 to 1989, then apparently dropped off the grid entirely. No tax returns filed after 1989. No credit applications. No utility bills, no voter registrations. Either Arthur Jensen had died, or he'd assumed a new identity to avoid detection. Jessica's investigation was about to take a much darker turn. The Oregon school where Jensen had worked was Riverside Academy, a small private institution outside Portland. Jessica contacted their current administrators and found that the school had closed in 1995 due to financial difficulties, but their records had been transferred to the Oregon Department of Education. After 3 days of bureaucratic navigation, she obtained Jensen's personnel file from Riverside Academy. The information painted a troubling picture of a man whose behavior had grown increasingly erratic during his 2-year tenure there. Jensen had been hired in August 1987 as a general science teacher, using his Elmwood experience as his primary reference. But by spring 1989, there had been multiple complaints from parents about inappropriate interactions with students. The file contained 4 separate incident reports describing Jensen's tendency to keep female students after class for extended periods, his requests for personal information about students' home lives, and his offers of private tutoring at off-campus locations. The final incident report was dated May 15, 1986, exactly 3 years after the Henderson triplets disappeared. A 16-year-old student named Amanda Hendress had reported that Jensen had followed her home from school and attempted to convince her to get into his car for what he described as an important discussion about her grades. Amanda's father had confronted Jensen the next day and threatened to involve police if he didn't stay away from his daughter. Jensen resigned from Riverside Academy that same week, citing personality conflicts with parents and administration. Jessica called Amanda Hendress at her home in Portland. The conversation was difficult but illuminating. "I'd tried to forget about Mr. Jensen," Amanda said, her voice tight with old fear. "When I saw his name in the incident report you sent, it all came back. He was obsessed with me that whole spring semester, always finding excuses to talk to me alone, asking about my family, wanting to know my schedule outside school. Did he ever try to get you to go somewhere with him?" "Multiple times. He said I needed extra help with chemistry and offered to tutor me at his apartment. When I declined, he suggested meeting at the public library or a coffee shop. I always said no, but he kept asking. What about the day he followed you home? Amanda was quiet for a moment. That was terrifying. I noticed his car behind me when I left school, but I thought it was coincidence. But he followed me through several turns, right up to my street. When I got to my house, he pulled over and called out to me. He said we needed to discuss my academic future, and it couldn't wait until school the next day. What did you do? I ran inside and told my dad. Dad was a big guy, used to working construction, and he didn't tolerate nonsense. He went out and had a very direct conversation with Jensen about staying away from me. Did you ever see Jensen again after that? No, thank God. But I heard from other students that he'd been bothering other girls too. There was talk that the administration was going to fire him, but then he quit before they could. Jessica thanked Amanda for her courage in discussing the traumatic memories and promised to keep her informed about the investigation's progress. The pattern was becoming clear. Jensen was a predator who targeted teenage girls, studied their routines, and looked for opportunities to isolate them. Her next step was to trace Jensen's movements after leaving Oregon. This required help from FBI databases and interstate law enforcement networks. Detective Jessica Hayes had built relationships with investigators across the country during her 12-year career, and she began making calls. The breakthrough came from Detective Lisa Marcus in Phoenix, Arizona. Marcus had been working cold cases for the past 5 years and recognized Jensen's name from a missing persons case that had haunted her department. We had a case in 1991, Marcus explained during their phone conversation. 3 teenage girls from different high schools disappeared over a 6-month period. They were all honor students. All had part-time jobs that kept them at school late for various activities. What happened to the investigation? We never found the girls or identified a suspect, but we had a person of interest, a substitute science teacher who had worked at all 3 schools. He disappeared right around the time our 3rd victim vanished. Do you have a name for this substitute teacher? Theodore Brooks. But Detective Hayes, when you described Arthur Jensen's physical appearance and background, it matched Brooks perfectly. Same height, same general build, same teaching specialty. Jessica felt her pulse quicken. Do you have a photograph of Theodore Brooks? I can scan it and email it to you within the hour. If it's the same man, we need to coordinate our investigations immediately. The photograph arrived 45 minutes later, and Jessica's suspicions were confirmed. Despite a different hairstyle and the absence of wire-rimmed glasses, Theodore Brooks was clearly the same man as Arthur Jensen. The facial structure, the shape of his nose, the way he held his mouth, all identical. Marcus faxed over the complete case file for the 3 missing Phoenix girls. Maria Santos, 17, who disappeared in March 1991. Jennifer Park, 16, who vanished in May 1991. And Christine Bell, 18, who was last seen in August 1991. All 3 had been honor students involved in after-school activities. All 3 had mentioned receiving extra help from a substitute science teacher in the weeks before their disappearances. The timeline fit perfectly. Jensen had left Oregon in May 1989 and apparently surfaced in Phoenix by early 1991 using the name Theodore Brooks. When the investigation into the missing girls intensified, he disappeared again. Detective Marcus, I think we're dealing with a serial predator who's been operating under multiple identities for decades. Agreed. I'm going to contact the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit and request a profile. If this guy has been active for 30 years, there are probably other victims we don't know about yet. Jessica spent the weekend reviewing everything she'd learned about Jensen's pattern of behavior. He targeted teenage girls at schools where he worked, studied their routines, gained their trust through offers of academic help, then abducted them when opportunities arose. He was organized enough to plan hiding places and patient enough to observe his victims for weeks before striking. Most chilling of all, he'd been perfecting his methods for decades. The hidden room at Elmwood High School had been constructed with considerable skill by someone familiar with the building's layout and construction techniques. The Henderson triplets might not have been his first victims, but they appeared to be the crime that taught him to be more careful about disposing of evidence. On Monday morning, Jessica received a call that would break the case wide open. "Detective Hayes, this is Robert Martinez from the Elmwood Public Works Department. You asked us to check our records from the 1980s about any construction or renovation projects at the high school. Yes, what did you find? We've got work orders from April 1984, about a month before those girls disappeared. Someone requested modifications to the basement area of the school, wanted to install additional storage space and update some electrical connections." Who requested the work? According to the paperwork, it was authorized by the school's science department head. But here's the interesting part. The actual work was done by a private contractor, not our regular maintenance crew. And the contractor's name was Jensen & Co. Construction. Jessica felt the pieces clicking into place. Arthur Jensen hadn't just been a teacher at Elmwood High School. He'd also been positioning himself as a handyman and contractor, giving him legitimate access to modify the building structure without arousing suspicion. The Henderson triplets had been victims of a carefully planned abduction that had been in preparation for months. And now, 29 years later, Jessica was finally going to bring their killer to justice. Jessica's investigation took a disturbing turn when she discovered that Arthur Jensen hadn't been working alone. A review of financial records from 1984 revealed that Jensen & Co.'s construction had been a partnership, not a sole proprietorship. The business license filed with the state of Oregon listed two partners, Arthur Jensen and Leonard Foster. Foster had been the school's head custodian for 8 years when the Henderson triplets disappeared, giving him intimate knowledge of the building's layout and access to all areas of the facility. Leonard Foster was still alive, living in a retirement home 30 miles outside of town. At 78 years old, he suffered from early-stage dementia, but retained clear memories of events from the 1980s. Jessica visited Foster at Sunset Manor on a cold November morning, accompanied by Detective Marcus, who had flown in from Phoenix to assist with the expanded investigation. They found Foster in the facility's common room, working on a jigsaw puzzle and occasionally glancing at a television showing morning news. "Mr. Foster, I'm Detective Hayes. I'd like to ask you some questions about your time working at Elmwood High School." Foster looked up with cloudy but alert eyes. "I worked there for 23 years. Good job, good benefits. Kept the place running smooth." "Do you remember Arthur Jensen? He taught science there in the mid-1980s. Foster's demeanor changed immediately. His hands began to shake slightly, and he looked away from Jessica's direct gaze. "Art Jensen. Haven't heard that name in a long time. You two worked together on some construction projects, didn't you?" "We did some work around the school. Nothing major, just improvements here and there." Detective Marcus leaned forward. "Leonard, we found a room in the basement of the school, a hidden room where 3 students were held against their will. We know you helped build it." Foster's face went pale. He pushed the puzzle pieces around aimlessly, no longer making any attempt to fit them together. "Those girls? I never meant for anyone to get hurt." Jessica felt her heart rate increase. This was the first direct admission they'd received from anyone involved in the Henderson case. "What girls are you talking about, Leonard?" "The 3 sisters, the pretty ones who looked so much alike. Art said he just wanted to talk to them, help them with their college plans. Said they needed guidance and their parents weren't giving them proper support." "But that's not what happened, is it?" Foster shook his head slowly. Art had problems, issues with young ladies. He'd watch them, follow them, learn everything about their routines. When he found out the Henderson girls were planning to leave town for college, he said we needed to help them stay. Help them how? He convinced me we were doing them a favor. Said their parents were pushing them too hard, that they needed a safe place to think about their futures without pressure. I built the room thinking it would be temporary, just until Art could talk sense into them. Detective Marcus took over the questioning. Leonard, what happened to Olivia, Sophia, and Isabella Henderson? Foster began crying, tears streaming down his weathered face. Art kept them down there for almost a week. I brought food and water when I could, but Art said they needed to understand how much better their lives would be if they stayed in town instead of going away to college. Foster's voice faltered. At night, he confessed, he sometimes heard the muffled cries seeping through the concrete. Jensen had always waved them off as hysteria, claiming the girls would calm down once they understood his plan. But Foster admitted that after the third night, he stopped going downstairs altogether. The sounds haunted him still, echoing like ghosts he could never silence. Did they want to stay? No, they cried constantly, begged to be released. The one with the longest hair, Olivia, I think she kept saying she had a scholarship to Boston University and couldn't miss her final exams. Jessica exchanged glances with Marcus. The timeline Foster was describing matched their evidence from the hidden room. Leonard, what happened at the end of that week? Art said the girls weren't being reasonable, that they were too influenced by outside pressures to make good decisions for themselves. He said we needed to help them find peace. The implications of Foster's words hit Jessica like a physical blow. Are you saying Arthur Jensen killed the Henderson triplets? Foster nodded miserably. He gave them something to drink, said it would help them sleep peacefully and not worry anymore about college or leaving their family. I didn't know what he was planning until it was too late. What did he do with their bodies? We put them in plastic bags and loaded them in Art's truck. He said he knew a place where they could rest forever, and no one would disturb them. Where did he take them? Foster looked confused for a moment, as if trying to grasp a memory that kept slipping away. The old quarry about 15 miles north of town. Art said the water was deep enough that they'd never be found. Jessica made rapid notes while Marcus called for a search and recovery team to investigate the quarry Foster had mentioned. After 29 years underwater, there might not be much physical evidence remaining, but modern forensic techniques could potentially identify remains even in challenging conditions. Leonard, we need to know everything about Arthur Jensen. Where did he go after he left Elmwood? Did he stay in contact with you? He disappeared right after the girls. Said he was moving to California, but he'd write to me. I got a few letters over the years, always from different places. Oregon, Arizona, Nevada. He said he was still teaching, still helping young people make better life choices. Do you still have those letters? My daughter cleaned out my house when I moved here. She might have saved some of my old papers in storage. Jessica obtained contact information for Foster's daughter, Linda Williams. Linda agreed to search her storage unit for any correspondence from Arthur Jensen. 2 days later, Linda called with significant news. She'd found a box containing 13 letters from Jensen, spanning from 1987 to 2003. The letters revealed his movements across the western United States and provided crucial evidence of his ongoing predatory behavior. In a 1991 letter postmarked from Phoenix, Jensen had written, "The work here is very rewarding. I've been able to help several young ladies understand that their dreams of leaving home were unrealistic. They're much happier now that they've accepted guidance." A 1995 letter from Las Vegas contained similar coded language. "The desert is peaceful. It's a good place for young people to find rest when they're confused about their futures. The most recent letter, dated 2003, had been sent from a small town in Idaho. "I've found the perfect community here, very family-oriented with traditional values. The local high school appreciates my dedication to helping students make wise choices about their lives." Jessica immediately contacted law enforcement in every location mentioned in Jensen's letters. The response was overwhelming and horrifying. 14 different jurisdictions reported unsolved missing persons cases involving teenage girls that matched Jensen's pattern of operation. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit confirmed what Jessica had feared. Arthur Jensen, operating under at least 6 different identities, had been one of America's most prolific serial killers for nearly 3 decades. But the investigation was far from over. The letter from Idaho was less than a decade old, which meant Jensen might still be alive and active. Finding him would require a coordinated effort involving multiple law enforcement agencies and the full resources of the federal government. The Henderson triplets were finally going to receive justice, but they wouldn't be his only victims to find peace. The FBI's National Crime Information Center database revealed that a man matching Arthur Jensen's description had been using the identity Timothy Barnes in Clearwater, Idaho since 2002. Barnes worked as a substitute teacher and part-time handyman, living in a modest house on the outskirts of town. Far away, Jensen, now living as Timothy Barnes, had begun to sense invisible eyes on him. For weeks, he had varied his routes to the school, changed his grocery shopping hours, even doubled back on country roads to check his rearview mirror. He trusted no one, not even his neighbors. After decades of hiding, instinct told him the hunt was nearing its end. Detective Jessica Hayes received authorization to lead a joint task force, including FBI agents, Idaho State Police, and local law enforcement. The plan was to conduct surveillance on Barnes while gathering evidence to confirm his identity as Arthur Jensen. Special Agent Maria Santos, the FBI's lead investigator, briefed the task force team at a command center established in Boise. "Our subject has demonstrated extreme caution and planning in previous operations. We need to assume he's aware that law enforcement could eventually track him down, which means he likely has contingency plans for escape." The surveillance team positioned themselves around Barnes's neighborhood on November 20th, 2013. His house was isolated, sitting on 5 acres of rural property with limited visibility from neighboring homes, a perfect location for someone who needed privacy for illegal activities. Agent Santos coordinated with Jessica to review everything they knew about Barnes's current identity. Timothy Barnes had been employed by 3 different high schools in the area over the past decade, always as a substitute teacher, specializing in science classes. School administrators described him as reliable and knowledgeable, though somewhat reserved in his interactions with faculty. More concerning were the personnel notes from his most recent position at Clearwater High School. 2 different teachers had reported that Barnes seemed to show unusual interest in female students, asking detailed questions about their academic performance and family backgrounds. "He's still hunting," Jessica observed during the briefing. "Even at 74 years old, he's continuing the same pattern of behavior." The surveillance team's first major break came on November 22nd. Barnes left his house at 3:30 p.m. and drove to Clearwater High School, where he parked across from the student parking lot. Using telephoto lenses, investigators photographed him, apparently watching students as they left school. Over the course of an hour, Barnes focused his attention on 3 different girls, following their movements with his eyes and occasionally making notes in a small notebook. When one girl, a blonde teenager who appeared to be about 16, got into a car and drove away, Barnes followed her,